Lloyd Wasson. Thanks, Chris, for your channel. You were one of the first familiar faces I saw when I left Scientology, and your channel is a big help on getting and keeping my head straight after years of indoctrination. It was amazing to see my old management senior talking with a real straightforward approach to leaving Scientology. For years before I left, I proudly told my fellow Scientologists I was a flag-trained Class 4 co-audit supervisor and cramming officer. I also would explain to WOGs that I was a very knowledgeable Scientologist proudly. One of the biggest things I have had to deal with after leaving is the deflating of my ego. I still think it is my biggest weakness and struggle to keep it in check. I am sure you also have struggled with this. How do you deal with it? Also, I have suffered from depression shortly before leaving and a bit afterwards, which of course at the time I didn't admit to myself. Have you dealt with this? I also would like to say to the non-ex-members that Scientologists are people and most are good people, and for some of us, this cult has ruined and destroyed our life and the lives of those closest to us. Yeah, coming out of Scientology is rough, and it's not generally appreciated just how rough it can be. I've talked on my channel here about the recovery process and things that I've had to go through to sort of educate my way out of the cult think that goes on in Scientology. And I have also in that time educated myself on a lot regarding thought reform and thought control and that sort of thing. And I mention those things because I think those are the single most important aspects of recovery. For me, has been that educational factor. Coming out of Scientology is one thing. Getting reacquainted to the real world is a whole nother thing, and getting used to everything. But learning what happened to you and why it happened to you and how it happened to you provides you with a lot of ability a lot of closure, a lot of ability to kind of end off on the bad things that were done and how they were done and why you fell for them. And that deflating of the ego thing is part of that, because I think for me, I certainly had, ego problems or problems with self-worth and morale, or, however you want to put it, because I thought that I was stupid. I thought I was, how could I have fallen for this? What kind of a moron am I? That sort of thing. Yet at the same time, earlier, I'd had a very puffed up and inflated sense of self because of what Scientology's teachings tell you, that we're the chosen ones, we're the special ones, we're the ones who have the inside track. This is nothing unique to Scientology. Every destructive cult does this. And I mean every destructive cult, including political and social destructive cults as well, right? You liberals and conservatives out there, and various social justice warriors out there who think you have the only line into the truth. That's not the case, right? So there can be a fall. There can be this this puffed up ego, and then you hit the real world outside of the bubble world of Scientology, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know all this stuff. And it hurts, and it's like there's a culture shock or real world shock or something to it, and it can be difficult to make that transition. But something to keep in mind is you're you. And you are and always have been a good person and have always had the self-worth that you have. And, specifically to the person who asked this, Lloyd, I mean, we were people who knew each other when we were in, and I was his senior. A lot of people, and you included, who got into Scientology did so for all the right reasons. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just because a destructive cult takes a good person or with a good purpose and twists that for its own ends doesn't mean you weren't a good person, and it doesn't mean that you didn't have a good purpose. And it doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're not, or intelligent or have an IQ. And it doesn't mean that you don't have an honest desire to help people and an honest desire to do good in the world, all of those things you can hold on to. There's nothing wrong with any of that. And those are the things I held on to. And fortunately, and I come back to this over and over again because it was so important to my recovery, was critical thinking, was finding out about, learning about, and utilizing critical thinking to break down what happened and why it happened. And realizing that as part of that we were fooled, right? We were taken advantage of. And so to a degree, victimized. And that matters. That's a fact. That's not an opinion. That's not some I'm being a victim. It's like, no, that actually happened. In the same way that, although different, but in the same way that a robbery victim is victimized, or a person who is raped is victimized, though that's victimization. Somebody did something to you. And in Scientology and in destructive cults, it's the same process. Somebody overtly took advantage of you. And so that puffed up ego part gets deflated. But my advice is, don't let it go too far. Don't think that because you were victimized that you're a fool or stupid, or generally, that you didn't have your head in the right place, or your heart in the right place, that sort of thing. Okay. As far as the depression goes, I have not really suffered from a depression, I would say. I had certain PTSD symptomology that was never clinically, identified as such or something. It's not like I had some diagnosis with this. It's all sort of through education that I came to realize some of this stuff. So I highly recommend now that if there is a depressed state, or if there is PTSD or something like that, that you seek some counseling from a professional who knows what they're doing. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of professional therapists and counselors and psychologists who are as familiar with destructive cults and how destructive cults work as there should be. I think this is something that they should be taught, and unfortunately it's not something that they're taught, so it tends to be rather niche. So you have to shop around a little bit, and you have to find counselors or psychologists who have some background in it or have some familiarity with it, so you don't spend half your sessions explaining to the counselor what it's all about that you went through so that they can get up to speed. I think that's totally lame that has to be that way, but it does. But there are some good counselors out there who do know what they're doing, and they can be found, and they can be extremely helpful in the recovery process in getting through a depression, or getting through PTSD, or any other kind of mental problems that result from those kind of the destructive cult experience.